Hi everybody. This is the first part of a two-part tutorial series that I promised you in class that I want you to go through and try and get these two pieces done before you come into class on Tuesday. And this is for project module 2, assignment 3. It's really talking about site diagramming, but the key twist in this one, the new thing you're going to learn is about how to go from an AutoCAD file to a SketchUp model. And it's fairly straightforward, but there are a few things you have to think about in terms of how we export stuff out of AutoCAD, and that's why you see AutoCAD on the screen right now. Now, this is the exercise, the assignment that we're going to be working on. It's actually the healing garden over at Mount Minning Medical Center. We just recently opened, and actually was designed by Derek Kalp, who's one of our own graduates and works for the Office of Physical Plant as a landscape architect. So I'll show you some pictures. I think I have some somewhere here, right here. So this is a healing garden. Took a whole bunch of pictures and they're not in any particular sequence, but just going to run through them. It's a space outside the hospital, right in the corner on the back side, which used to be kind of just a big lawn area. Sorry, I got some details of the stairs and things. And so this is designed to be used by patients, by employees. There's spaces to sit. There's lots of plantings, relatively young right now. And it's also designed to be enjoyed from the air. So I think I have another picture I'll pull out. But what you see is these lawn areas. These are actually veins. These lawn areas create the form of leaves that you can see from up above in the windows. And you can also see there's quite a bit of topography change, slope change across the site. So these things are actually kind of an epoxy pea gravel that you can walk on. They're hard, but they're kind of like exposed aggregate. And you can see a lot of stonework. I've got the stone wall that kind of slopes down along with that. So it's kind of a cool design. It's interesting from below. You use a lot of curvilinear forms, some walkways, stairs that come down from the upper level. And it was designed around an existing retaining wall. I think there was just kind of a seating space up here or something. And there was a really ugly gazebo out here that people used to go out and smoke in. But since they made it a smoke-free medical campus, you're not allowed to do that. And they decided instead of having a place where people can go smoke, they would have a place where people could go relax, enjoy the outdoors, and be regenerated by that. So anyway, there's a few details here. We'll get into some of this stuff later on, how we do all those pieces. Like I said, a lot of stone used, concrete walkways. Sorry, I got a few textures in here I'm going to pull in later on. It's tied into, there's a little cafe or sitting area inside out here, so you down here, so you can come out from the inside seating area and go out into that landscaped area. Let me move around here a little bit. So this is going up to the area that's just off the, here's the drop-off area over on the left here for the main entrance to the medical center. And the pavers are different up here. And there's actually a really cool water feature that recirculates, kind of a dry pool down here, and lots of stone. So this initial part of the assignment is going to be just about getting the forms on the ground plane from AutoCAD to SketchUp and creating a terrain model from contours that are in the AutoCAD drawing, which already have elevations on them, and then draping or kind of projecting those forms onto a landform surface. Also going to introduce the use of Topo Shaper, although I think I mentioned and we've used the terrain from contours tool. It's one of the sandbox tools that comes with SketchUp. Topo Shaper is a free plugin that does a much better job, and the main reason it does a better job is because it actually creates a square mesh. It's triangulated, of course, but it's a regular square mesh, triangulated mesh, as opposed to what the terrain from contours tool in SketchUp does, which is create a series of triangles that vary depending on the number of points in the contours and the spacing apart, which makes it really hard to manipulate it, to shape it, to use something like Artisan to be able to mold that landform. So anyway, I'll talk about more about this. You can see this from the upper level here. We've got these kind of leaf-shaped lawn areas, and within those leaf-shaped lawn areas there's veins that I think also collect the water and drain it down and allow it to percolate back into the soil. So it's actually a really nice space. You can see from my photos, it wasn't a very nice day when I was there taking these pictures, but it really has a nice relaxing feel to it. It's easy to get around in, nice sense of scale. Here's one photo that my wife, who's actually a nurse at the hospital, took. So you get a little reflection, but you can see the leaf shapes down there. And this one, there's actually a drain right down in here, or a area where the water flows into, and it collects down there. So anyway, we'll talk more about that and some nice paving areas and benches that you can sit in. Okay, so that's the project. And what I want you to do is we need to get these walkways, the veins, planting areas, sidewalks, all those things that go on the ground plane, exported from AutoCAD and brought into SketchUp. So it looks very complex here. Don't let this scare you. One of the things we're going to do, again, these trees are all, I think they're all created as blocks. So we will be exporting those. We're going to teach you a command in AutoCAD called WBlock, and basically allows us to write out any part of this drawing into separate files, which makes it a lot easier in SketchUp. We don't really want to bring all these vein lines and all the scoring lines and the pavement and everything else into SketchUp, because it just creates, well, at least initially, it creates a lot of complicated geometry that makes it difficult to connect it up with the terrain model. And, you know, these are secondary things anyway. The edge of the walkway is what's important. And so I'm going to talk about that sequence that we go through once we get into SketchUp. But this is about how we isolate those layers and export them. And there are a few things you have to think about as you're doing that. For right now, I'm not going to deal with any of the vegetation, any of the plantings, these stones. We're not going to deal with that because we'll bring those in later on. So this first part is just about how we get this stuff out of AutoCAD. And then the second part will be how we import it into SketchUp and begin to build a 3D model from these parts. So what we want to do, basically, I want to isolate the contours, the boundary line, the edges of the walkways, and they're on a couple layers. One's down here for the parking, the curbs, the edges of these walkways. There is a wall here. There's a wall here that we looked at in the picture. This is the big stone wall that kind of slopes down, and the edge of the building. So those are the things I want to bring out. Essentially, I'll call it hardscape, as you'll see in a minute, but essentially everything that kind of hits or sits on the ground plane as a surface. Then we'll bring in things like that, which is what you would do first. You build those paving areas, lay that all out, pour the concrete, and then later you would come in and bring in those boulders to create the water feature. You'd also put the walls in as part of that initial construction. So those are the things we're going to export in this sequence. Now, there's a couple things. I'll just talk about the contours briefly. These contours are already ready to go. If I click on this and open my properties up, you can see that right here, elevation, there's an elevation. Now, if I hit escape, click on this one, that's 1100, that's 1099, that's 1098, 1097. So you can pull up the properties of any polyline, and type in an elevation. If you do that in AutoCAD, when you bring those into SketchUp, they will be at that elevation, and we can use the Topo Shaper to create a contour or a terrain model very quickly. So I've already done that for you in this model that you'll be working with, so you don't have to add those in. I just wanted you to understand that all these contour lines in this case, they look 2D, but they're not. They actually are floating in three-dimensional space here. And for the contours, that's good. For other things, that's not so good, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So the first thing I want to do, because this is really hard to see, I want to talk about a couple other issues that we're going to be dealing with. I am going to isolate the information out that I want to separate. So in order to do that, I am simply going to use my layer isolate tool. So I'm going to pick my contours. Actually, for this operation first, we'll come back to that. I'm going to isolate the other geometry, and then we'll come back and bring in the contours. Okay, so what I'm doing is just hopefully clicking on all the layers that I need. I'm not going to bring these veins in yet. That's kind of a secondary thing that I'm going to do. I want the edge of the building right there. I think these are all on the same layer. So clearly, how you organize your layers in an AutoCAD file, if you do it very well and very logically, then you can pull out those pieces that you want. If you have these lines and these lines on the same layer, then it gets to be a problem. So that's why we've taught you, Professor Goldberg went over how to set up those layers and keep those things, those bits of information separate. All right, I want this layer as well. And I can bring that. This is a little planting bed edge. I'm not going to worry about that right now. I'm not going to worry about the steps right now either. We're going to bring those in as a later piece since they're a structure that we're going to build three-dimensionally. They don't actually sit on the ground plane. We don't need them. So let's see if I got everything. I'm going to right click, choose enter. Okay, so for whatever reason, I got these in here and I will do it over again because I don't want these veins. They may have already been selected, but everything else looks perfect. Well, it looks like I'm missing a piece of this. Is a little service drive that they left in once they redid this. So if that happens to you, no problem. Just go back up here, do layer unisolate. So let's go through and try this again. Border, layer isolate, sorry. Isolate, border, outer curb, inner curb, sidewalk, that walkway edge, this walkway, seating areas, parking lot. I'm going to get that, which I missed before. Make sure I have this, these, the building. And I think that's everything I need. This is a little circle in the grass, so I don't really need to pull that in right now. I think that's it. Let's try. Enter. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Now, you'll also see a couple things that are not working so well. And this, I know this happens to be here, so I'm going to fix it now. This gets back to your drafting in AutoCAD. If these points don't line up, it creates an issue in SketchUp. So when you draft this up, make sure you use the object snap and everything fits together. If you have little lines like this that don't match that endpoint, that's not good either. So, and I missed the line there. So I'm going to click on this, move it out, click on that, snap right to the corner, okay? So if you do your drafting properly, okay, here's another example. There's two edges here. One's for the existing and one's for the proposed walk. I don't really need both of those, so let's pick one, just delete that. So this line runs through and it still connects right into this one. Well, it should. Okay, so even after a regen, this doesn't fit. Okay. All right, I got a nearest snap. It's on there. Just want to make sure. Okay, so anything you can do to clean that up in AutoCAD before you take it out. I'm just telling you right now, there's a couple errors. One's the bottom of this step. One's up here. I think these are okay down here. And there's a gap here, so I'm going to use my arc tool and just fill that in. That gap is where the stairs are at, so actually probably could use a different arc. What do we have here? Actually, 3 points probably the best. And snap right to the corner. And again, this isn't really critical because so first, kind of looking at the second, third, that looks pretty good. Now, the other problem with this, we are going to put the steps in here. That's why this isn't really a big issue. I just want it closed in. In order to drape this on the train, you want everything formed into a closed loop. I also know down here, there's that extra little line. There we go. I don't know why that's a repeat, but I'm getting rid of that too. So the connection of this walkway to the front sidewalk, to the entrance road, this corner here, there's an extra line in here, and these gaps. Now, since these aren't on the right layer, I'm going to choose Match Properties. Click on this. Enter, let's see, sorry. Yeah, there we go. Match Properties, Source, Destination, done. Okay, and I don't really even need this in here because the stairway is going to show me where that is. I'll delete that. Let's see. The other thing, because this is kind of, no, that's okay. That's all open there. That should work. All right. Now, whenever you see this too, there's duplicate lines in here. That creates a problem. So that dash line must have been from a boundary from a drawing blow up area or something. So that's another one I got rid of. So again, it comes down to how good your AutoCAD drawings are. If they're well done and you isolate, clean them up, that works pretty well. So for this information, this looks pretty good. Now I could pull the contours in here and do this export all at the same time. Since the contours have elevations, they won't come in connected to this geometry. But since I have this separate, let's just do it separate. And then we'll isolate the contours and export that. So again, I just want to make sure everything is connected. There's no extra lines. And then there's one more thing I have to do before I export that. And this is really important. You'll notice that these lines here, well, some of them, yeah, polyline, polyline, polyline. They're all polylines and they have arcs. So what I'm going to do is select across all of those. And then I am going to explode them. Now the reason for this is you don't have to explode the lines. They actually get exploded when they come into SketchUp. The one entity that comes through, or two entities that come through into SketchUp from AutoCAD unharmed, are circles and arcs. So if you have a polyline that's straight, it always comes in as a series of segments, right? Because in SketchUp, it doesn't understand polylines. They're a series of connected lines. And for straight lines, that's good. But if you have curvilinear walkways like this, and you just export this right now and bring it into SketchUp, it will come in as a whole series of tiny little line segments. And that may work, but it may not. It makes connecting them into surfaces more difficult. And it also means that you can't change the size of those arcs. If it's not smooth enough and you want it smoother or you want it rougher, if it comes in as segments then and not arcs, then there's nothing you can do about what you get is that's it. But if we go in here and we explode this, now what you'll see is when I click on this, I just have arcs and line segments. So these arcs will come into SketchUp as true arcs. So I can select them, go to the object entity info, and change the number of segments if I want to. So that's really important. If you have a totally rectilinear design, you don't need to explode it. But if you have curves in it, polylines that include arcs, you want to explode all those. So, and if you explode everything else with it, it doesn't matter. So just select everything and choose explode. The other thing you want to make sure is, and in this case, I don't think anything in here is, when we do the veins as a separate thing, some of those actually had elevations in them for beginning points and end points. And so one's at 0 and one's at 1091 or whatever, and it doesn't work very well because you get a line that goes way up in the air. So you want to make sure all these surfaces are two-dimensional. The contours, we don't want to touch them. We want elevations. But these other things, we want two-dimensional. We're going to create surfaces out of them and drape them on a landform, as you'll see in the next tutorial. So once I have this isolated, I've exploded the polylines so that they're arcs and line segments. And now I'm going to select everything that you can see here, and I'm going to type W block, okay? And that stands for write block. Now what it's really doing is writing out a AutoCAD file. Now since I already have objects selected, I don't need to do anything. I don't need a base point. What I do need to do is specify the file path and name. So I have a folder I've been working with. I'm going to back up, create a new folder. Let's name it W block ACAD. just so I can keep it separate. So I'm going to create a folder where these files are going to go, and then I know where to find them when it's time to import into SketchUp. So let's open this up. Let's name this hardscape. Okay, and save. And okay. All right, now I want to go back and layer unisolate. Just brings everything back. Choose layer isolate again. Pick the, I have two types of contour lines, the index, the primary, and the 1 foot and the 5 foot. So select both of those, enter, and there's all my contour lines. Going to do the same thing. Select them. W block. Click on my location. Just call that contours. And save, and OK. And then we can layer and isolate again. So for right now, well, let's look at these veins, just some thinking about it. It's in this tutorial. You don't really have to do these for Tuesday. We can add those in later, but let's isolate those. Now, these things, one of the things about those is some of these in here, not that one. So this one, you can see that it has a elevation of 1091. And I don't want that. I want all these to be at 0 or flat. So I'm going to select all those things and type flatten. And flatten does just what it sounds like. Now the key with this is, it says remove hidden lines, no. That's what you want, no. Don't type yes or it creates a problem. So now when I click on that same line, you can see the elevation is 0. As I said, otherwise when you bring it into SketchUp, it understands the elevation. So one end will be at 0, and one will be 1,000 feet off the ground, and that's not what we need to turn into a surface. So I'm going to select these and do a W block. Again, all this is doing is writing these things out, and that's the reason why we're using layer isolate, because we're not going to get other things. If you just hide the layers and select across, you may end up exporting things you don't want, because it doesn't, it's like SketchUp, it doesn't turn off the geometry, it just makes it invisible. I'll just call these, oops. Sorry, my typing is so bad. With this split in my finger, I can't type use the normal way, so I'm using the hunt and peck method now. Okay, save that, and okay. And you'll notice, if you probably didn't notice it, but in that dialog, the export units defaults to feet, and that's fine. Just leave it whatever it is. Okay, so that's kind of the process. You take your AutoCAD file, you isolate the pieces that you want, and again, we're going to start with the hardscape, and maybe I want to bring some. What about these walls? So let's do that too. I don't know if I'll get, you don't have to do the walls necessarily, but they might help with the walkways. So let's bring them in. So here's a wall, this blue one, and here's a wall, and that's pretty much it. So I'm going to right click or hit enter. There's my two walls. Select them. W block. Click on that. Let's call that walls. And save. Okay. And isolate. We got everything there. So let's minimize this now. Sorry, that's right open. And let's go back to SketchUp. So this is just a blank, empty SketchUp file. Got rid of Steve. And we're ready to start importing. So pretty straightforward process. Import. Make sure you set your files of type to AutoCAD or you won't see them. And then click on the options button. One of the things you need to make sure you do is leave this at feet and make sure preserve drawing origin is checked. If you uncheck that, each one of these will come in a different XY position and they won't line up, and then you can't do a model. So keep that checked. Leave them alone when they come in. They're not going to be at 0, 0, 0. They're going to be out whatever this is geo-referenced to, and that's okay. So make sure that's checked and leave it that way. And then everything will line up. So the first thing I'm going to do is choose my hardscape, open, and comes in pretty fast. Says this is 145 arcs, 296 lines. If you read this and you don't see arcs, you didn't explode your polylines. So make sure it'll just be a whole lot more lines. make sure you see that. Now, it's not at 0, 0, 0, so the easiest way to find it is click on Zoom Extents. All right, so there we go. You can see all the lines. And what we're going to do is, the first thing before we bring anything else in, I'm going to select all this, right-click, and choose Generate Faces. So we need to turn this into a bunch of faces. Now, I kind of generated a face, but it didn't make anything connect to it. So next thing, select everything, right-click. Well, let's do this first. Sorry, there's another plugin. So let's select all this. And one of the issues when things come into SketchUp is, you know, they may not, the line segments, particularly on arcs where things intersect, may not connect. So there's a couple plugins I have here, and the one we want to use is Extend Close Lines. So what that does is it finds any place where there's a line with just a slight gap to the next edge, it just extends it to meet it. And that's what we need to help close these. So do that first. Again, that's an extensions menu, Extend Close Lines. Sometimes this delete short lines helps, but in this case, I'm going to try this surfaces again first before we do that, because sometimes it can also delete lines that you don't want it to. So I'm going to zoom out, I'm going to select everything, and I'm going to right click, and since we did generate faces already, I'm going to try intersect faces with selection. Okay, so you can start seeing now that it's broken this down into that, and sometimes just go through and you can do it again. And you can see just by doing it again, it's starting to pick up more surfaces. The more it has, the more it understands. So I did that twice, and right now everything is pretty good except for a couple spaces. So this area here is actually a different paving than this. And you can see the hint, the cue is here, or the way to understand what's going on is to look where there's thick lines. So here's a thick line here. And the other thing I want to do is, well, I don't think I have any hidden geometry, so I would just delete that, use the line tool, draw across to there, and now you can see that's not separated. So we're going to select it, intersect faces with selection. Okay, so maybe there's a leak somewhere else that we're going to figure out here. So again, look for any place where you see a thick line or some of these intersections. So I thought I fixed that, but a line like that inside a space will keep SketchUp from forming a good connection. So I'm going to select across, selection. Okay, so now that got separated, but there's something still going on right here. And I thought I fixed that too, but oh, I know what I did. Okay, let's do this the right way. Sorry. I didn't go to the right file. I've run through this a couple times. Import. I made a new folder with new hardscape because I knew I fixed that. So again, options, preserve drawing origin. Hopefully this will work better because I cleaned those up. So again, I've got everything here. I'm going to do this. Even now I can do, let's do extend close lines. All right. And now let's right click on it. Actually better to do it in that sequence, and choose generate faces. Select it all, right click, intersect faces with selection. Get it again, just try it again. Okay, that's a lot better. Got a little break there, but it's better. So I kind of had a suspicion maybe down here whether that's actually connected. And when you kind of see those things going in there, I probably, you know, I just think that endpoint. Okay, tried to connect that. All right, so if that's not working, I'm going to delete that segment. I'm just getting rid of the arc. If a piece of geometry doesn't connect, which it doesn't sometimes, so I drew that arc just to make it tangent. I'm going to do intersect faces with selection. All right, so maybe that's not the problem. And I'll show you how to kind of go through this. Okay, we started back up here. Let's get this out of here and just go straight across. Now, one of the things I think I have noticed on this, you do have to be careful because there are some lines here that are very close to the red or green axis, but they're not exactly on it. So if you start drawing across and you get an inference, it's not really connecting to the endpoint, which is what you want it to do. So I want to make sure I get endpoint, endpoint, endpoint. So any place I have this, when I know I need to line up, snap to there, snap to there, snap to there. All right. So it looks like that's still the only place. Everything else looks really good. Everything else is separated except for that. I'm kind of thinking that this may have something to do with it down here. So I'm going to get rid of that. There we go. That definitely was it. That was a really long arc that this kind of overlapped into that. So I just got rid of that edge and replaced it. And now I think other than this little line right here, which I don't know why it's not connecting, endpoint. Sometimes I hold this edge and just go get off the inference. Yeah, see now it connected on the inference there, and now I can connect and it works. So if it's not, I think that inference was so close that it was actually pulling it off the line. It just wouldn't connect to it. So by going at an angle and connecting, once it connects, now, okay, it's still not separated. Let's check these other edges. That's definitely a thin line. That's a stubborn one. And you can also clean up any little lines like this on the outside. All right, well that all looks good except for this. So I'm not sure why this isn't. Let's try this. I'm just going to draw another line in here. Okay, so it's not that. Oh, of course, that makes sense. Sorry. There's nothing wrong there. What's wrong is this is still connected. So if I want to isolate that, I just need to separate that. Because eventually we're going to make that a different paving. So as long as that's connected, right, there wasn't anything wrong there. It was still connected on this side. Okay, so that's really what I want you to do in this first step, is to output those files and then bring them into here. Now, if you bring another one in, let's bring those. I'm not going to bring the veins in quite yet because we're going to bring those in later, but let's bring the topo in. So the first thing is to bring this in. I selected everything and I chose generate faces to do the initial pass, but the other thing I did was I selected everything and I chose extend close lines just to make sure that any place there's a little gap, it's going to fill that in. And then any place you see thick lines, like this one's kind of doing weird things, I'm going to get rid of that. Put that in there, get rid of that. I know I've got an endpoint. This is one where you have to really zoom in and make sure you get right to the endpoint. And now I've got those all separated out as well. Okay, that's the goal. While it's a flat surface, get rid of those pieces and all the little extra parts so that I can select each piece, each area, and it selects as a separate area, just like in the last exercise. Okay, so let's bring in the terrain now. Import that. Contours, don't have to check options. Now these, if I go extents, you can see the topo is up there where it belongs. And what I'm going to do now is create a terrain model out of this. Now it's kind of grouped inside here, so I'm going to open that up, select this. I'm actually going to cut that, close the group, paste in place. So it's in the same location, but it's not part of this group. Okay, select it all. And that Topo Shaper icon is the one you've been moving around that has a little green icon. The terrain from contours this is Sketchup's built-in, but I want you to use Topo Shaper. Then you select the contours and click on it, and it gives you this little map. And it sees gaps in the contours and tries to connect them. And actually, I don't think this is really important, but if you wanted to connect that to there, that to there, you move over it, it tells you that's 1096, that's 1096, that's 1095. And it knows what the elevations are. It's a pretty smart little piece of software, and it allows you to connect those. But you can actually create the terrain without doing that. There's a contour here that doesn't connect anything because it's like an odd. I added it in there to create a smoother landform. So you shouldn't have to do anything to this. For right now, just click Calculate Terrain. That's the first step. And it gives you this preview and a kind of a skirt around it, which we can change. And there's a corresponding map here that shows you the grid. And in this case, we don't really have to change the grid. It's accurate enough. It gives us pretty good representation. And so we'll just hit Generate Terrain. And then you move outside, click to exit, and it will leave the contour selected, which we'll just delete. I just hit the delete key. Now, what it's doing is it's putting the terrain up here and it's putting the skirt down to 0, which I don't really want. So I'm going to come in here. This is still a group. I'm going to explode that. I'm going to come in and select the bottom, hit move, and just move that up. So actually what we're going to do eventually is move this back down so that we can put it. It doesn't really have to be underneath, but it makes more sense to me visually to select this and move it above and have the terrain below. Because what we're going to do is take this geometry and put it on this surface. And the way we do that is select it. And this, we do use one of the built-in tools. It's called Drape. You click on the Drape tool, move over your surface, click, and just move your cursor away. Now you'll notice at the bottom, it's making a progress here. So I've got one good piece of advice, and that is don't click, don't touch anything, don't do anything until it's done figuring this out. If you do, you'll probably make Sketchup crash. It's never had a very good error trapping when it comes to the draping function. But what it's doing is figuring out how all those curvilinear lines fit onto that landform below. So I'm going to get my select tool, and I'm just going to explode this so I don't have to keep opening the group up. And it's doing the same thing. Now, you see, although I fixed this before, right, there's still a couple pieces that are connected. This doesn't really matter. Well, no, this doesn't matter. These look good here. There's some disconnect. And again, where I see thick lines is where I'm suspicious. So if I turn on the hidden geometry, you can see that Topo Shaper made a really nice regular mesh, which we could use Artisan to modify if we want. In fact, we will down here before we drape that little seating area that's a big grass circle with boulders around it. But what I want to do is separate this. So I'm going to come in here, just right click and choose Erase. Get the line tool, end to end. And once I see that separate, then I know I solved that problem. Again, I'm coming in here. So I just have to go back, turn this off. So now that's separated. That was the problem there. And okay, so sidewalks all being the same are fine, although this really is a separate piece. No, that's okay. But this is lawn area over here, and I think there are some issues down here that we just have to look at. I can already see there's kind of thick lines here, so let's turn our hidden geometry on. And again, for whatever reason, just going to delete that. That solves that problem. I'm not going to go through in this. There's a couple other thick lines here. Just look for those. Look for these little thin ones. You can right click on it, get that little piece out of there. And this is probably what's causing some of the problem. And it just, for whatever reason, the geometry doesn't connect. There's a gap here. So if you see them kind of disappearing, I just erase all those. get rid of those little pieces, reconnect to the endpoint, and that's looking a lot better. So I think if I turn this in geometry off, so that's all separated. The only thing that's connecting is right down in here somewhere, which is right there, which is that little corner we had some trouble with before. So I'm just going to reconnect that. And I can check here. I don't know what that's, just intersect with selection. That's a single line. I'm just going to delete it, redraw it. Now I see that line is actually maybe the one that's giving us the problem. There we go. So it does take a little detective work to figure out what those little things are. And right now this is kind of flowing out into the curb, which probably is okay in this case. But again, I could go through here and start replacing those. I'm not going to go through. But wherever you see those thick profile lines, that's where, or you see it, you know, leaking out into these spaces. That's the areas you need to look for. So the goal for Tuesday is that you watch this video, you export these layers from AutoCAD, and then you go through this process importing them into SketchUp, turning them into two-dimensional surfaces first. You could take those and just drape them onto here, but I find it works a lot better to take a little time to close it as a 2D surface because it's simpler, and then take that surface, create the terrain model, and then drape it on the terrain model. And then later we'll deal with how we can manipulate this a bit, bring the steps in here, the steps in here. We can put our wall in. We don't need to drape the wall in here if we were going to put the wall in. This is how I would handle that. We go import, walls. Okay, so there's one of those lines is still, I didn't get the elevation on it. So I'm going to go in here, delete that, and use a line to connect in there, and then use a line to, well, this is one that's really hard to get it. As long as I see that saying constrained line, it's not giving me the endpoint. So I'm going to come in a little bit and do that, and then it just doesn't want to find the end of that line, and that's not going to close. So, oh, there's the endpoint. So there we go. Also, if you start zooming in and getting this cut off, one way you can get around that, if you go to camera and parallel projection, oh, that didn't work much better, did it? No. I think one of the reasons this is happening, and we can't really solve it yet, is when you get models that are way far away from the origin in SketchUp, you start getting some of these visual clipping issues. And once we get everything in, we can go through and move everything back to 0, 0, 0. But we don't want to do that until we're done the importing process from AutoCAD, or nothing will line up right. So now that I have this, I'm going to double click in here, select that, generate faces. I'm going to take that, make it a group. Take that, make it a group. I'm going to select both of these. I made that a group. Okay. I'm going to cut those, get outside there. Oh, I had two of these shapes, so let's delete that one. Paste in place. Now I could use the outliner to pull those apart as well, but and then I can come in here. Now in this case, this is the one that kind of slopes along the surface. I'm going to use a different method, which I'm not going to get into now. This one is just level. It's that brick wall. So I'm going to use the push-pull, pull it up, and get outside of here. And then I'm just going to select that, right-click, and choose Drop GC. And it just drops it down onto the terrain model. And wherever it hits, it's not perfect, but then I'm going to use Move, and I'm going to just move it vertically. So it's a fairly low wall from the upside. And so we're just going to drop that down in here. And we might even use some of these surfaces eventually to drop them down in there as well. But for, again, for this tutorial, for what you need to do, if you get this far, you're doing really well. Okay, so hopefully this will be helpful, and I guess I covered everything in this one, so I'll mention it in the email. I'll just do this one tutorial. It's a little longer, but you get the idea and you get the process. All right, great.